A new president has taken the oath of office in Zimbabwe, but is he any different from the old one? My guest here in London is Mangwana, the UK representative of the country's ruling ZANU-PF party. With 35 years of bloodshed on their hands, massive corruption, and an economy in ruins, what business have they got continuing to govern? Mangwana, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me.
We have your new president saying that he was inaugurating a new democracy. This is a man who in 37 years has shown no inclination to promote democracy in any form whatsoever. What's to suggest that he's going to change now?
I think that's not very correct, Tim, to say that he didn't show any inclination to promote democracy. What we're talking about here is a man that has been a Speaker of Parliament, who showed an even-handedness in Parliament for the time he was one. We're talking here of a man that lost elections and was happy to accept the results therefrom.
We're talking of a man who's been individually named and sanctioned by the EU, first in 2002, when the European Council expressed serious concerns about human rights violations by the government of Zimbabwe.
Among 273 other people?
Absolutely. Collective responsibility. The
That's
European
correct.
Council's ban was extended in 2004 and 2009. They accused him, Mr. Mnangagwa, as a member of the government, of engaging in activities that seriously undermine democracy, respect for human rights and the rule of law. Seriously undermine democracy. That doesn't sound so good for the future, does it? You think he's seen the light?
That's EU plans which would have been applied to any Zimbabwean at that time, and we're talking 273 members of the establishment. So you're basically saying that the Zimbabwean army, the whole of the Zimbabwean military forces should, because the top hierarchy were all there. You're saying the bureaucrats, you're saying the journalists that were there were undermining democracy.
Well,
EU plans, it doesn't make it correct, does it?
Went along with the system, didn't they? That did its best to extinguish democracy year after year.
No, Tim, that's not correct.
So everybody else got it wrong. The EU got it wrong. The US, which also sanctioned him, got it wrong. Everybody got it wrong.
They work in tandem. No,
you were so misunderstood, weren't you?
That's not correct. The point I'm making is, yes, there were human rights violations. That goes without saying. And yes, we're in national building. But yes, we've taken responsibility because we went and put in place a new constitution.
You
with
haven't taken
safeguards.
any responsibility at all because nobody's been brought to justice.
But because
that's not taking responsibility.
because our constitution. Well, we have a new act which is coming in place of national reconciliation, where all these matters will be dealt with. So when we do national healing, yes.
Are they also going to deal with the most serious allegations made against Mr. Mnangagwa, which came in a 2002 UN report to the Security Council? It called him the key strategist of an elite group involved in illicit diamond trading. Have you read that report?
I read that report, and that report is full of conjecture and innuendo and no facts whatsoever. They were simply calling him the beggarman.
If you read it, why didn't you call for an investigation then?
What investigation?
Into these allegations.
What allegations? That he was the beggarman for the Zimbabwean government.
According to the report, the networks, which he was a senior figure in, made money through what they called a variety of criminal activities, including theft, embezzlement, diversion of public funds, undervaluation of goods, smuggling, false invoicing, non-payment of taxes, kickbacks to public officials, and bribery.
Tim, if you had read that report as you want to pretend you did, you would know that
no pretense.
As you did, but there is no specific. There is no specific. There's no specific allegation. What it simply says is that Mnangagwa was in a certain hotel. He was the beggarman because he was the Speaker of Parliament. He was the beggarman for the government of Zimbabwe. That's what the report says. But there is nothing specific.
So nothing to be investigated here. Not even worth investigating. He's above the law anyway. So why bother?
If the Congo lost some diamonds or lost money to Mnangagwa or allegedly, they should. It's for them to investigate. What's the Zimbabwe to investigate? It's not Zimbabwean diamonds we're talking about here. It's what is alleged to have been
that's okay then. If they came from the Democratic Republic of Congo, that's fine.
I'm not saying it's okay.
As long as it's not Zimbabwe.
No, I'm saying it's not our responsibility responsibility to use money to investigate things that have happened in the Congo when it's not us who lost the money. The Congo, if they lost any money, because the accusations are not on Mnangagwa, they are on a multiple corporations, they are on many governments, or against many governments. So let them investigate.
Mr. Mnangagwa, do you expect Zimbabweans, never mind the international community, simply to gloss over all this instead of seeking a detailed accounting of what took place? Or don't you care?
Or don't you
simply don't care?
Or don't you see the rose petals which Mr. Mnangagwa and the generals are being feted with? They're being feted with rose petals right now. They are heroes, including the generals you're talking about, who are involved in all these things that you're talking about. So it means Zimbabweans are happy with the situation. The people that are not happy is you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're happy. Everyone is happy. They're heroes.
We'll come on to that in a minute. Let's talk about the public theatre of the last 10 days, 2 weeks.
We can talk about that, yeah.
Mr. Mugabe wasn't pushed out in order to bring in democracy, was he? ZANU-PF had been perfectly happy trashing democracy for 35 years. The thing that brought change was the terrible realization that Mr. Mugabe was going to bring his wife into the top job. And that would have upset all the vested interests in your country, people who'd counted on Mnangagwa coming in to protect their interests and their secrets. So you couldn't risk that, could you?
No.
You just couldn't risk that.
No, that's not correct. What people could not risk is somebody whom they thought would to be unstable and who appeared and behaved in an unstable way to take over the controls of power in Zimbabwe. It would have destabilized the whole country. It would have destabilized the region. That was the concern.
That's not the view of Didymus Mutaza, a veteran of the liberation struggle. He was close to Mugabe for 50 years. He was quite clear. The army intervened, he said, to save ZANU-PF, not the country. And he ought to know. He ought to know, shouldn't he?
Mutaza is a member of the opposition who also has got vested interest in undermining the liberation. It doesn't matter. He's still a member of the opposition.
So he's wrong, is he? He says the armed forces...
He's entitled to his opinions, and he has an opinion.
He says the armed forces are made up of ZANU-PF members, he said, not Democrats, intent on ushering in a pluralistic system. Not Democrats intent on ushering in a pluralistic system. So in other words, forget about democracy.
No,
it's just the same thing.
In other words, forget about Didymus Mutaza. He's a bitter, sad old man. That's what I'm saying. Let's not forget about democracy. Let's forget about what a member of the opposition would say against a party they oppose.
You can go on saying that, but nobody's fooled, are they? Even at the swearing-in ceremony, there were people who weren't taken in. Look at the president of Botswana, for one, Ian Khama. He said it pretty clearly. I don't see why I should wish him, Mugabe, well. If he cared nothing for his own people, why should I care for him? And then there were the crowds that booed the police commissioner, General Augustine Chuhuri, and the calls for him to step down. You think you talk about rose petals for everybody. It's not rose petals at all, is it?
I'm sure you didn't actually check the relationship between the people of Zimbabwe and the Commissioner General, the generals, the rest of the army, or the rest of the securocrats, and the general and Chiwori. Why do you think the police were made to stand down? Why are they only right now, as I'm talking to you, starting joint patrols with the army? Because the police were not trusted by the people. They were not trusted by the army. They were not trusted by they were trusted by only President Mugabe. Why? Because the person that was second in command of the police is his cousin. And the whole point was to safeguard that presidency.
Mr. Mangwana, what is disturbing to many people, seems to be in your country, that there are plenty of signs that the new president is no different from the old one. You take his warning about pluralism and political opposition. Those who oppose us will bark and bark, he said. They will continue to bark, but the ZANU-PF train will roll on, ruling and ruling while they bark. Again, it's all about the party, isn't it? Nothing about the country.
That's a misinterpretation of what he actually
That's a direct quote of what he said.
Yes, but I would tell you, any quote taken out of his context loses its meaning.
You think this man is ever going to allow the barking dogs of the opposition to sweep him out of power? Not a chance.
If they win,
not a chance.
If they win, he would. If they win, he would. When he uses the backing phrase, it's not only about opposition. It even included grace. What he was simply saying is, when I'm focused on something, I'm like a train or a locomotive. Every dog which runs around alongside the tracks can bark and bark, but the locomotive does not stop. It goes.
And the locomotive is not the country, it's ZANU-PF as far as he's concerned.
ZANU-PF is a vehicle for transformation within the country.
It's a vehicle. It hasn't done much transformation in 35 years. It's trashed.
We made mistakes.
It's trashed democracy and trashed the economy.
We didn't trash democracy, but yes, we made mistakes. And yes, we messed up the economy.
Mistakes.
But here we are.
Disaster. Whatever line you toe, and you're a very friendly guy, you're a nice, jovial sort of fellow.
Thank you very much for that.
But whatever line you toe, you know full well that Mr. Mangwana is hostage to the brutality, the brutal record of ZANU-PF. His period as head of Central Intelligence in the mid-1980s coincided with the most brutal of all Mugabe's massacres, didn't it? So-called Gukura Hundi killings, in which up to 20,000 from the Ndebele tribe were killed or disappeared. He's denied any role, but actually the state-controlled Bulawayo Chronicle reported at the time that he compared dissidents to bugs and cockroaches that had reached such an epidemic that the government needed to bring in DDT to get rid of them.
There are two things,
His words.
Tim.
His words.
Yeah, I heard you. Now give me a chance to respond to you. First thing is, we were in the very formative years of our country. Mistakes were made.
And that excuses massacres
no,
of 20,000 people.
It doesn't excuse them. We're not making excuses. I'm simply saying we made mistakes. So that's an admission that we made mistakes. That's number one. Number two, during that period, when he was Minister of State Security, he was coming to Parliament to account for his actions all the time. We had a very robust Parliament at that time.
You didn't make mistakes. You committed crimes. These weren't parking offences for which you go to court and pay a fine. This was murder on a grand scale.
There were mistakes.
To call it mistakes is the biggest understatement in history, Mr. Mangwana. Mistakes.
It's not.
Hitler made mistakes. Did he? Stalin made mistakes. No, they were mass murderers. This was mass murder. Don't diminish it.
No, we lost people. We lost Zimbabweans, and for all UK, I lost family too. It's unfortunate that it happened, but in the formative years of any nation, if we go back to the history of Britain, we would find that there were pages, there were people that died. It doesn't clear people, it doesn't make it any better, but the facts still remain. In the formative years of a nation, things will happen which should not happen, and that should not have happened.
Mr. Mangwana, violence is stamped into your party's DNA, and that's already been proved yet again in the last week. The very day the new president was sworn in, the former finance minister, Ignatius Chombo, was handed over to the police by the military, who had beaten him up severely while he was held in custody.
And Tim, you're choosing. Were two testimonies, Chombo. Ignatius Chombo, which is the minister you're talking about, his version and his lawyer's version. Chombo, he himself, in his testimony in chief, he never said he was tortured.
Is he wrong? Is he wrong?
You know, he didn't say he was tortured. Yes, the activist lawyer is wrong because the actual person didn't allege anything.
Are you telling me they didn't beat him up?
No, they didn't beat him up. And
you know this for a fact. You've investigated.
Well, he never said that.
You know this for a fact?
He testified in court. We're going by the court records, isn't it? When somebody testifies under oath, that's what we go by.
As his lawyer said,
why are we making it up?
As his lawyer said, it was a very brutal and draconian way of dealing with opponents.
If he says that I can accept, very much so, and I tweeted about it myself, that this is not the way we want to do things. But
so thuggish is the country that you've created that a few weeks ago,
yeah, you're calling us thugs.
The man who was, let me finish, the man who is now president had to flee for his life a couple of weeks ago.
And that's an unfortunate state of affairs.
That's pretty thuggish, isn't it?
It's not thuggish.
Country where one of the most senior politicians had to flee for his life?
I don't accept you calling me and my countrymen thuggish. But I would say that it was unconventional, it was wrong, it shouldn't have happened that way. But we're not thugs.
Isn't it
and
time,
right before you is not seated a thug.
Isn't it time that you came out and admitted what's been going on in your country all these years, apart from just trying to get out of it by calling it a few mistakes?
No.
And admitted that people deserve something better than ZANU-PF, don't they?
People
they really do.
People deserve what they vote for. Exactly. That's what democracy is about it. If people are choosing ZANU-PF, then they deserve ZANU-PF, isn't it? Are we going to prescribe leaders for the people of Zimbabwe? They've made a choice. They will make a choice. In July or so, they will make a choice again. If they choose ZANU-PF, that's what they deserve.
I put it to Joyce Majuro, who was Mugabe's vice president for 10 years.
Yeah.
That Under Mugabe, Zimbabwe became a byword for corruption, murder, atrocities, and torture. She didn't argue with that. She didn't argue. She said it's a fact. Well, it's known.
Again, when you quote opposition, she
wasn't opposition. She was with him for 10 years.
Yeah, but then
vice president.
But then, if
you haven't said sorry for any of these murders, corruption, atrocities, and torture.
Corruption is there, and it's a problem. There you go. I've made an admission. Murders, not to the scale you want to say. Things happened, as I told you, in 1980, which shouldn't. In the 1980s, which shouldn't have happened. There you go.
You love those understatements. Things happened. No, these were murders and massacres that were carried out. This was brutal, brutal violence. And you just dismiss it by saying things happened.
When I'm saying things happened,
playing it down?
There were tourists who I mean, there were dissidents. 1, 2. There were tourists who were actually kidnapped and killed. There was sabotage. Of infrastructure.
There was pre-election violence, especially around 2008.
No, I'm explaining what I mean by things happened. So the response to that was disproportionate, yes, and that's why I'm saying things happened, because things happened on both sides, and that's the phrase I think would not raise temperatures and ethnic tension in Zimbabwe, which is exactly I think what you're trying to do.
In January, on the Voice of America. You were asked why your party hadn't been more successful in improving lives for the majority of Zimbabweans in 3.5 decades in power. And you replied, it's a matter of time. It's not going to happen overnight, of course.
Yeah.
Who are you trying to kid? 37 years, and you say it's a matter of time and not going to happen overnight?
When people sing this 37 years mantra, they pretend that there's nothing good happened in Zimbabwe. When rural electrification went around, when there were a lot of educated people, when schools were built, when provincial hospitals and referral hospitals were built, when we started with 1 university and now we've got 16, positive things happened in Zimbabwe.
Oh, nobody denies your educational
but it's not
achievements.
No, it's not a wasted 37 years, you see.
But as for the economy, Mr. Mnangagwa, you certainly said... Mangwana, yes.
Mangwana, yeah.
I'm sorry, but you certainly set records, but they weren't the records you wanted. Under your party's grotesque mismanagement, inflation peaked around 2008 at 231 million %. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. We hold that record, but why? Because the West undermined our economy.
Oh, it's the West's all fault.
Well, not all the time, but
not your staggering incompetence.
No, of course we had incompetence, we had ineptitude as well. I give you that, but let's not completely dismiss the role the sanctions played, because the whole point was to bring down the Zimbabwean economy and the Zimbabwean government, and it worked to some extent. But the only thing that didn't happen is the government was not brought down.
Your inflation now is running at more than 14%. Industrial output is less than 10% of GDP, compared to 25% in the 1990s.
And nobody's underrating the work before the new president. It's a lot of work. It's a task which he has to embark on right now. That's why he said, I have to hit the ground running. And the first top government official to make this admission, when he was vice president, he went to China. And he made the admission that Zimbabwe was 20 years behind in development. And when somebody of that stature and that level makes that admission, it's a very important admission. And because of that, he's not underrating the task before him.
There are plenty of signs that your public wants justice. And these last few days, plenty of Zimbabweans have been speaking out because they feel they're able to.
Yeah, they should.
They haven't. Tino Marafo, small business owner in Harare, he reacted pretty badly to the news that Mugabe and his family have already secured immunity from prosecution. He said, why do people think that once a crook is out, it's now okay for them to keep their empire? Why even bother overthrowing them if we're not going to reclaim money and assets? Kudzai Mbadzo, a maid working in one of the wealthy suburbs, she said, let them live peacefully in Zimbabwe, but they must find out how much they have. If it's a lot, maybe take half. Forward Mazvi Torreira, one of your party officials. Mugabe should be prosecuted and sent to jail for a long time. He said, if I meet him one day, I'll give him a blow in the street. He squandered my livelihood. You really think people are going to accept this immunity deal? It's
up to the people, but I can tell you this, that our constitution does not grant immunity post-incumbency. So President Mugabe was immune to prosecution when he was in office. Now, how the new government will process this whole thing or gazette this immunity is something else, because it's only binding in as far as their own goodwill and their gentlemanliness is concerned.
He's already been told that he can keep his assets, he and his family, and get at least 10 million. George Charamba, Mugabe's principal aide, told the Times newspaper last week that the ex-president had been assured his assets were secured.
And which assets are those?
Okay, they own a dairy. They're the largest landowners in the country. They own a dairy.
Allegedly.
2 private schools. They control the running of an orphanage. They own a 25-bedroom house in Harare, known as the Blue Roof, along with a second property in the same city and a 3-story home in the country.
Yeah.
They have a 2.4 million house in the Sandton suburb of Johannesburg,
Allegedly,
an apartment in Hong Kong, and a rumour also to have property in Malaysia and Singapore. Not bad, actually, is it?
Not bad at all. Not bad at all.
If they can keep all that.
Not bad, but...
And no consultation on this shoddy little deal that allows him
Did you want a referendum?
to be beyond the law. What a precedent that sets for your new democracy.
Did you really want a referendum on that? Or this thing was negotiated and the Zimbabweans celebrated? They didn't care. They didn't mind what it was. They wanted to move on with our lives.
I thought you wanted a democracy. I thought the talk of new democracy where no one is beyond the law.
So do you think democracy is bloodthirstiness and vindictiveness as well as retribution? It's not. If we're talking of restoration, yes, we're talking about something else, but not the type of democracy where you think, well, let's go back and rack temperatures and
oh, no, let's not have any justice. No.
What's your definition of justice, Tim? What's your definition of justice?
Brought to account for massive fraud and for crimes like murder and torture.
And people are being brought to account.
Who?
Well,
who?
Mr.
Mugabe?
You raised the finance minister.
Mr. Mugabe? No.
You raised the finance minister a few minutes ago.
What about the man who ran the show?
Well, the man who ran the show, unfortunately, fortunately for him, but Zimbabwe needed to move on, and this was the best solution considering our circumstances.
With a shoddy deal that the MDC,
if you have a referendum on this, I would tell you 90% of Zimbabweans would endorse this deal.
The opposition MDC doesn't endorse the deal. It says it's unconstitutional. They don't endorse it.
Well,
they have quite a few supporters around the country.
Court. They can challenge it, isn't it? That's the whole essence of having a constitutional court. We've got 9 judges, prime judges, who can overturn it if it's unconstitutional. Let's go. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of having institutions which are independent. And our judiciary is independent.
Grace Mugabe, she gets $75,000 a year for life.
When Mugabe has died,
you think that's fair?
And you think having a pension is wrong?
Think she paid tax on any of her illegal earnings?
Do you have any problem with people getting pension?
I didn't set $75,000 in a country where unemployment and poverty are endemic. Unemployment and poverty are endemic.
Can you please respect our constitution? Because our constitution says those things should happen when the president leaves office or the vice president leaves office if they've served a term, at least one term.
Aren't you ashamed of these shoddy little deals?
Do you want me to be ashamed of my constitution? No, I don't. I'm not ashamed of my constitution. I uphold it, and that's what the oath. That's the oath even the president took, to uphold that constitution. So we are not ashamed of our constitution. It's one of the best in the world, and we rate it very highly.
If the elections take place next year, as they are scheduled to do so, your party can hardly campaign on its record, can it? 37 years of corruption, 37 years of blood on its hand, and now this deal, this immunity deal, presumably to buy Mr. Mugabe's silence because he has capability still to take a lot of people down with him.
You've got a very interesting filter.
Why should anyone vote for you?
Tim, you have got a very interesting filter. Look at what you have filtered. I've told you that we have got more than 60% outreach and coverage in electricity. I've told you everything else that we've done. I've told you about our literacy rate. I've told you about the hospitals we've built. We've got a lot to campaign for. We've told you we've resettled people. We've got a lot to campaign with.
But not human rights. No human rights.
Oh yeah,
but that doesn't matter.
We have a lot. No,
mistakes were made.
No, we have a lot to improve on that one, Tim. We have a lot to improve, and lessons will be learned. The MDC has got violence too. You know, the vice president in the MDC was touched a few weeks ago. Our ambassador, when she was in the MDC, our ambassador to Senegal, when she was in the MDC, she was bashed again by thugs. It's unfortunate that we've got a culture of violence around us, which we want to eradicate, and we haven't had this violence during this period. Give us some credit. From the 14th, when the army intervened, up to this point, We haven't had any incidents of violence. Yes, there's a bit
Well,
of
we're
looting.
running out of time. Nick Mangwana, you had 37 years of credit. Thanks very much for being on Conflict Zone.
Thank you for having me,
Thank
Tim.
you.
Cheers.